Have you ever begged to die? Not because you hated life, but because you were so tired you couldn't carry it for one more day. I have. I wasn't a pessimist. I wasn't lost. I was a woman living in the Midwest who loved watching corn grow tall in the summer fields, an author of 10 books, and a wife who believed she had a peaceful and fulfilling life. And then one day it all collapsed like a building without a foundation. Since that moment, every night I whispered the same thing to God. Simple. Just 3 sentences. The first, please let me go. Or if you have any miracle left, please heal me. The second, please don't make me make one more decision. I'm tired. And the third, perhaps the strangest prayer of all, if I must die, please don't make me review my life. I've already lived it once. I don't have the strength to look at it again. You see, I wasn't afraid of dying. In truth, I longed for it. I believed it would be the most beautiful release I could ever know. I imagined leaving this body like a bird flying free from a rusted cage. Free, weightless, silent. I called it a gentle death. But no one told me that sometimes prayers do get answered. And when they are, you may find out that what you thought was the end is just the beginning. Not everyone who prays to die is given a chance to witness something that defies all logic and medicine. But I was. And now, I can't keep that story to myself. Because I believe there's someone out there right now, whispering the same desperate prayer. And maybe just maybe my story will make them think twice. But it didn't start with a miracle. It began with what looked like a perfect life and a death no one saw coming. My husband died during his lunch break, right after an argument over the phone. And in that exact moment, I fell into a darkness no map could guide me out of. You won't believe what happened next. I used to think I was one of the lucky ones. Not the kind of luck that explodes like winning the lottery or being celebrated by the world. But a quiet sort of luck. A warm home in the heart of America, a successful husband, books I poured my heart into writing about historic architecture, and mornings where the sun rose slowly behind endless cornfields. I loved the Midwest not for its glamour, but for its invisible simplicity. Out there, you could live an entire life without needing to race. Just breathe slowly. Watch things grow. Be grateful for the little things. That was how I lived for nearly a decade. A life I believed was healthy, complete, meaningful, and full of love. My husband was a steady, successful man. Quiet, hardworking. We weren't the kind of couple that posted perfect pictures online, but there was respect between us. Trust. I wrote. He worked. Each day moved like a steady piece of music, gentle and familiar. Until one afternoon. One short phone call. One not-so-serious argument. One final sentence. I don't want to talk anymore. And then silence. Forever. He passed away just minutes after hanging up. No warning. No goodbye. No last words. Just a giant emptiness that no sentence could ever fill. Some people die from illness, from accidents, from time. But I lost my husband to a pain I never even knew he was carrying. And I lost myself because I believed I was the cause. Can you understand that? The feeling of being the last person to speak to someone you love, and having that conversation end in conflict. When they die, your grief is not just from the loss. You keep living inside the role of the one who failed them. It's not just a shock. It's a slow-burning bomb, one that erodes layer after layer of your heart, every single day. I couldn't write a single word after that. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to live, but I didn't dare to die either. I just existed in the dark, in guilt, in questions that had no answers. And the worst part was, no one truly understood that. Everyone was kind. They offered comfort, encouragement. But no one knew that every single morning, I had to fight just to convince myself to open my eyes. Life before that fateful day wasn't a paradise, but it was peaceful enough that I used to think, if life could just stay like this forever, that would be enough. I had a husband, a career I loved, autumn mornings writing by the window, summer evenings watching the corn stretch taller, golden under the honey-colored sun. There were no major storms, no overwhelming ambitions, just the quiet fullness of things most people overlook. Simple dinners, casual conversations, mornings where I'd make coffee for him and we'd step onto the porch, breathing in the mist together. You wouldn't find me in the media. No grand biography. No headline-making quotes. But I had a life that felt just right, simple, honest, shared with someone, built around something meaningful. I still remember that small study, filled with stacks of old manuscripts and an ancient typewriter that still worked after 20 years. I still remember the first time I was invited to write a column for a major newspaper, not with pride but with gratitude. I never believed I was special, but I knew I was useful. And deep down, I believed I was loved. Especially by him, the man who never used fancy words, but always showed up when it mattered. He wasn't the kind to buy flowers, but he never missed an oil change. He didn't write love letters, but he always left his phone on when I traveled. I thought he was okay. I thought we were okay. I thought the road ahead would still hold seasons of golden corn and gentle sunrises. But it turns out, people can bury their pain so deep, even while living right beside you. And the truth is, the deepest pain I've ever known came from the one who once looked at me with the gentlest eyes. When he left, he didn't leave a single word. Just a silence that's still echoing inside my chest. I once read somewhere that death isn't as frightening as being left behind without knowing why. Every day after that moment, I tried to retrace every tiny detail. I replayed that last phone call in my head hundreds of times. I asked myself over and over, I shouldn't have raised my voice. I should have asked more questions. Maybe I could have saved him. But do you know what the worst part is? No amount of should-haves will ever bring back the person you love. And when you're the last one who spoke to them, the last one who heard their voice before they chose to end their life, you don't just lose them, you lose yourself too. I lost all sense of direction. My emotions went numb. The things that once brought me joy became meaningless. Even writing, which had always been my haven, turned into a silent, barren place. I stopped writing. I stopped sharing. I stopped stepping out into the world as someone fully alive. I became a shadow, drifting through each day, carrying a heart full of questions no one could answer. And then, I started to pray. Not because I believed God would rescue me, but because I had nothing left to say to anyone else. I started whispering into the night, if you see no more value in me, please just take me. Night after night, I repeated that same prayer, begging for release, begging for a quiet ending, begging to fall asleep and never wake up again. Back then, I didn't know those prayers were being heard. I still remember the day I closed my unfinished notebook and left it on the windowsill where I used to write. I still remember standing in front of the mirror, unable to recognize the woman staring back. And I remember with piercing clarity the first time I whispered to God, if you want me to go, then just take me. That was when I began to pray for death. But what I didn't know was that it was also the moment destiny began rewriting the story of my life with an entirely different ink. I lived like a ghost for 29 more months. And every night, I prayed to leave this world. But God didn't take me right away. Instead, He sent something even harder, cancer. And that's when I began to understand that sometimes, our deepest prayers are answered not with escape, but with a lesson. No one teaches you how to survive after the person you love takes their own life. No manual tells you what to do when they leave in the middle of an argument, in the middle of a lunch break, in the middle of a life that seemed like it was still moving forward. My husband died on a sunny afternoon. He came home like any other day, but this time he didn't return. I didn't know until someone called. No one gave me details, only that he had chosen to leave this world, right after hanging up the phone with me. We had just argued. Nothing serious, but his voice that day was colder than usual. I remember every word, every sharp breath, every moment of that sudden silence when the line went dead. I thought I'd call him back. I thought he'd be home that evening. I thought it could still be fixed. But there was no callback. No evening left to sit and talk. Nothing. Just a single brutal truth. I was the last person to hear his voice. And after me came death. You can't understand what that feels like unless you've lived it. It's not grief. It's not a loss. It's a crushing surge of guilt, shame, and paralyzing despair. I wasn't myself anymore. I became someone carrying a weight no one could see. A wound that didn't show but bled every day. I tried to keep busy. I handled the funeral paperwork. I paid off debts. I packed his belongings. I replied to condolence messages with a calmness that made it seem like I was okay. But inside me was a flood. Every time I stood before his photo, I didn't know whether to cry or apologize. I started resenting everything that reminded me of him. Then I hated myself for feeling that way. Mornings when I couldn't get out of bed. Nights when I was too afraid to turn off the lights. Moments when I wanted to scream his name, but all that came out was a breathless gasp. Someone once asked why I didn't see a therapist. I had. But how do you tell someone that you believe you're the reason another person chose to die? How do you unravel the knots in your mind when your hands are trembling at the sound of a name that no longer exists? I started living like a shell. On the outside, I still went grocery shopping. I still smiled. I still waved to neighbors. But inside me, there was a funeral that had never been buried. And so, day after day, night after night, I whispered the same plea. If you are truly merciful, please let me go with him. At first, I thought I was just weak. But slowly, it became a ritual. A part of me. I didn't cry anymore. I just prayed. And waited. I thought death would come in my sleep. Or maybe through some accident. A stroke, perhaps. Anything, as long as it was gentle. But it didn't come. The first blow wasn't from God. It came from my own body. Just when I thought I had already endured enough pain, fate pushed me into a different kind of suffering. Not from the heart this time, but from within my flesh. An unexpected diagnosis. A disease I never summoned. And a promise I once whispered to God slowly began to come true. They say time heals all wounds. But some wounds don't bleed, don't scar, and no one can see them, so no one knows they're still bleeding, day after day. The wound inside me was a name. A voice gone silent. A pair of eyes I would never see again. And a single question that echoed endlessly in my mind. If I had loved him more, would he still be alive? I carried that question to bed. I woke up with it. I wrote it in my notebooks and tore the pages out because I couldn't bear to face it. I stepped into the second year after my husband's death, wrapped in a coldness that no one but me could feel. I smiled just enough for people not to ask. I nodded just enough for them to believe I was okay. But every night, when the house fell silent, when the wind slipped through the cracks in the window, I would begin whispering the same old prayer. 3 sentences, never changing. The first, if you can please let me go. I have no strength left to keep living. The second, if you insist on keeping me here, please heal me. Not my body, but the part of me inside that has rotted away. And the third, the one that sent chills through me every time I spoke it. If I have to die, please don't make me look back on my life. I don't want to see how I've hurt the people I love. I fear that truth more than I fear death. You see, I wasn't afraid to leave this world. I was afraid to face myself. I was afraid of the moments where a single hug, a different look, might have changed everything. Maybe that's what hell is, not a place of torment, but a place where you're forced to see everything you chose to ignore. I lived with that fear for 29 months. 29 months of nightly prayers. I wasn't praying for a miracle. I was praying for a quiet exit. I wanted to forget. I wanted God to close the book of my life without flipping back through the pages. I waited for death like someone waiting for the last bus, not rushing, not panicked, just sitting there, quietly hoping it would come. But something else happened. While I longed for release, my body began to ache. At first, it was just fatigue, then shortness of breath, then a sharp pain in my chest. I didn't go to the doctor because I was afraid. I went because I needed to know, is this the signal I've been waiting for? And then the doctor looked at me. His eyes softened, just for a moment, before he said what I already suspected. You have a mass. We'll need to biopsy it to be sure. I wasn't shocked. I didn't cry. I just smiled. For the first time in 2 years, I thought maybe my prayer had been heard. Maybe death was finally on its way. And I was ready. Truly ready. But what I didn't know was that God hadn't just heard me. He had prepared something else. Not death, but a meeting. A journey beyond anything I could have imagined. And it began in a cold, sterile operating room. I entered the surgical suite with one quiet hope, that I would never wake up again. But fate has a strange sense of humor. Instead of leaving this world, I was taken to a place that didn't belong to it. And in that place, I met him. The day I received my biopsy results, the doctor didn't need to say much. His eyes said it all. I sat on a cold leather chair, listening to each word as if it came from another world. Endometrial cancer. Stage 2. We need to schedule a hysterectomy as soon as possible. I didn't cry. I didn't ask how long I had or what my survival rate was. I didn't react like most people probably would. I just nodded softly, as if it were the next logical step in a long, relentless sequence of collapse. I had prayed to die. So this must be the answer, right? Not a message from heaven, but from my own body, which had finally begun to rebel and unravel. I walked home that day. It was cold and snowing, but I didn't feel it. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't scared. I wasn't sad. There was only a strange feeling, as if something in me had finally been validated. At last, the pain had taken shape. At last, the grief I had carried in my soul now showed itself in flesh and blood. I didn't have to pretend anymore. I could finally say, I'm sick. And maybe, I wouldn't be around much longer. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt peace. Because if this was the path to death, I was ready to follow it to the end. I began putting things in order: papers, notes to close friends, a surgery date, even a will. Not out of fear of what might happen, but because I didn't want to leave a mess behind. Death, to me, wasn't something to dread. It felt like a long journey back home. But there was one thing I didn't expect: the coldness of the medical system. I was just another name on a waiting list. One surgery among hundreds. I wasn't seen as special. No one knew how many nights I had begged for death. No one knew this wasn't just surgery, it was the final doorway I'd been waiting for. The operation was scheduled for a Monday morning. The surgical room was bright white, cold, and impersonal, like the hearts of people who've seen too many bodies to still feel anything. I lay there in a thin gown, bare feet exposed, the lights glaring down on my face. A young nurse smiled at me, so brightly it almost felt cruel. She said, "Don't worry, ma'am, this one's an easy procedure. The doctor is excellent." I looked at her, meaning to say something. But I said nothing. How could I explain that I wasn't worried? That I was hoping I wouldn't wake up from this surgery at all? They hooked me up to heart monitors, checked my blood pressure, and started the 4. The smell of antiseptic filled my nose. The steady hum of machines echoed like a quiet countdown, guiding me gently toward the end. As the anesthesia began to spread through my body, I closed my eyes and whispered one last time, "Please, don't wake me up again." But nothing happened the way I imagined. I woke up, hours later, in pain, in numbness, in chaos, but not in a hospital room in my own home. The doctor had discharged me just a few hours after surgery. "Nothing serious," they said. "Just rest at home and you'll be fine." I was sent home alone. No family, no nurse. No one knew I had just gone through one of the most critical moments of my life. I stumbled into the living room, still wearing the hospital gown, collapsed onto the couch, and waited for death to come in the most natural way it could. But then I felt something was wrong. A sudden heat, a wetness. I pulled the blanket back and saw blood. A lot of blood, pouring from the incision, soaking through the sheets, through my clothes. I called the hospital. No answer. I tried the nurse, the one who had smiled so brightly in the operating room. Her voicemail picked up. And even then, I didn't panic. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't even angry. I just thought, so this is it. I dragged myself to the bathroom, blood trailing behind me. I didn't want to stain the white carpet. Isn't that strange? A woman on the verge of death, still worried about keeping the carpet clean. I stood there, holding onto the wall, staring at myself in the mirror. My skin was pale. My lips were blue. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I grew dizzy, and then everything began to blur. No explosion, no screaming, just a soft, expanding haze that swallowed the room. And in that exact moment, I felt light. So light it was as if I had just slipped out of a suit of armor that had been weighing me down my entire life. I could no longer feel my body. I could no longer hear my heartbeat. But I was still present, still seeing, still feeling. I didn't know if I was dead, but I knew I was no longer a body. I was an existence. Weightless, silent, and filled with light. Not the light from a bathroom lamp, but a radiance from somewhere beyond anything words could describe. A place with no pain, no fear, no regret. Only one thing remained: love. Pure, unconditional love. A love that didn't ask me to prove anything, didn't judge me, didn't hesitate. And then a voice not heard with ears, but felt deep within my soul. "You're not finished," the voice said. "We need to talk." And I followed it into a place no living person had ever walked. I thought I had died, and in some way I had. But what I was about to see, feel, and hear would change everything I thought I knew about life. Because in that place, I was no longer human. I was a soul, and a soul cannot lie. I don't know when exactly I left my body. There was no sound, no sensation of slipping away or floating out. I simply wasn't there anymore. I was no longer the woman curled up on a bathroom floor, blood spilling between the tiles. I was no longer the person who used to write books or who begged for death. I was something else now. Consciousness? Spirit? Pure awareness? I didn't know what to call it, but I knew deeply and unmistakably that I was still me. Just without the weight, without the pain, without the chaos. I was drifting, not flying, not sinking, just existing in a state of weightlessness, directionless, timeless. A state of absolute freedom. And then the light appeared. It wasn't blinding. It wasn't harsh. It wasn't like sunlight or surgical lamps. It was the light of knowing, the light of peace, the light of a hug made of frequency. I couldn't see my body, but I knew I was moving closer to something sacred. No one pulled me forward. No one guided me. But I was drawn in as if my soul remembered exactly where it needed to go. As I entered that light, I felt something I had never once experienced in my entire life: complete acceptance. No more questions. No need for explanation. No one interrogated me about my failures. No one reminded me of my sins. Everything I had ever carried, hidden, or felt ashamed of was lifted, like shedding the final layer of clothing and letting it fall to the floor. I was exposed, yet I felt no shame. I was vulnerable, but not afraid. I only felt one thing: I was loved. Unconditionally. Then I heard a voice. It didn't come from outside. It rose from deep within my soul. A voice without tone, yet clearer than any language that's ever existed. It said, "You are a part of me, and you are not finished." I didn't understand. I don't remember if I asked anything out loud. I didn't need to speak. I only thought, and the question flowed out of me like a wave. Why? I've already suffered enough. The voice didn't answer with words. Instead, I was taken into another space, which I can only describe as a life review. A place without screens or seats, but filled with moments. Moments that were alive. Moments that knew me. And that's when it began. The life review. I saw my life again, but not through my own eyes. Through theirs. I felt what others felt when I hurt them, even unintentionally. I felt my husband's sorrow in the moments he swallowed his pain, the words he never dared to say, the times I turned away too quickly, the misaligned glances, the silences no one ever explained. I witnessed the small things I had done, things I thought meant nothing, that lit up someone else's world. A timely hug, an unsent letter, a simple question that ended up saving a soul on the verge of breaking. I cried not with tears, but with a flood of regret and love rising together. I saw with piercing clarity. Every action we take sends out ripples, and those ripples never vanish. Then I saw that day, the day everything changed. The final phone call, the argument, the last words I spoke to my husband were, but this time, I heard it through his soul. No anger, no blame, just a sadness so deep it couldn't be named. I no longer blamed myself, because I understood I wasn't the cause. But I was part of the weight that made him sink. I didn't kill him, but I couldn't save him. And that was the truth I had to learn to forgive myself for. I had thought God would judge me, but he didn't. He didn't need to. Because when you see everything in its raw, unfiltered truth, you judge yourself more clearly than any court ever could. I don't know how long I was there. Maybe a few seconds. Maybe a few lifetimes. In that place, there was no time. Only experience. And then the voice returned. Not to accuse. Not to scold. But full of love so deep, so personal, so complete. You have the right to choose. But if you go back, you will not return the same. I didn't want to go back. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew returning meant I would have to live. Live. Fully. No more hiding. No more delaying. No more coasting through moments with half my heart. Do you have the courage to live differently? I had thought the most miraculous part of this near-death journey was touching that pure light, experiencing a forgiveness so deep it seemed to come from a being beyond even the word God. But I was wrong. That light wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a meeting my soul had never dared to imagine. After the life review ended, I expected to be asked to choose to stay or return. But the space around me began to change. The brilliance of the light softened. It was no longer radiant like before, but became something more intimate. Like the glow in a quiet cafe where only two people sit together, whispering the unspoken. And I sensed someone was drawing near. There were no footsteps. No wind. No defined form. But the energy, I knew it instantly. Like a scent I had carried in my memory. Like a song I had heard 1,000 times. Like my heart recognized it before my mind could catch up. It was him. Not him, as in the man with brown hair and business suits. But him in the most essential, unfiltered sense. A being of presence, of essence, faceless, yet more familiar than the lines on my own hands. In this place, there was no greeting. No tears. No blame. Only the reunion of two souls who had once lost each other in pain, now reuniting in a love that no longer needed permission. I can't say he walked toward me. He didn't move. He appeared. And I felt wrapped in him, not by arms, but by memory. By connection. By something that had survived even death itself. I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to apologize. To ask why. to explain that I had prayed for so long to follow him. But I didn't need to say a word. I knew he already knew. And he had something to share with me, too. Not through speech, but through a feeling that poured directly into the center of my soul. I don't blame you. I never wanted you to carry that burden. I wasn't strong enough. But you weren't supposed to save me. That was never your task. I had lived 29 months tormented by what-ifs. What if I had spoken more gently that day? What if I had stopped him? What if I had seen the sadness in his eyes? But here, none of those what-ifs mattered. They dissolved. There was no need for conditions or hypotheticals. Only the truth remained. We had loved each other in the only ways we knew how, and that was enough. I asked him with my thoughts, "Why didn't you try to stay?" The answer came gently, like a whisper wrapped in peace. I was exhausted. But now I understand everything. And I'm not here to hold you back. I'm here to tell you, you must keep living. For the first time since he passed, I felt he had never truly left me. He wasn't in a grave. He wasn't swallowed by death. He was alive, just on a different level of existence. And if I chose to continue living, it wouldn't mean leaving him behind. It would mean completing a story we had started together. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say, "See you again." There was just a moment, either endlessly long or impossibly brief, where I felt his love dissolve into me, flow through me, become part of me. And then, like a silent breeze, he withdrew from that space. Not with sadness, not with loss, but with a gift fully given. A gentle message that settled deep into the quiet center of my being. Don't keep living because of the pain. Keep living for the truth you've seen. The light around me shifted again. And once more, I stood at the threshold of a choice. But this time, I wasn't begging to die. I wasn't weighed down by guilt. I wasn't a woman abandoned. I was a soul loved, loving, and called back. Not as a punishment, but for a purpose. And then I fell. Not in the way gravity pulls you, but as if I were being drawn back from the light. I saw it receding. I saw my body reappearing. I saw blood. I felt breathless. I felt searing pain in my lower abdomen. I had returned. I opened my eyes. The heavenly light was gone. The loving voice had faded. All I could hear now was the steady rhythm of a heart monitor. But this time, I hadn't woken to continue living the same life. I had woken up to live differently. And the very first step of that new life was facing a world that wouldn't believe a word of what I had seen. I woke to the steady beep of a heart monitor pulsing beside me. The scent of antiseptic seeped through every pore, and the soft, sterile glow of the hospital ceiling reminded me I was back. No more heavenly light. No more voice from the soul. No more him, the husband I had just seen again in his most radiant, pure form. Just me, flesh and bone, lying in a cold, lonely hospital room, with a weight in my chest so heavy it felt as if the entire universe had settled there. But something was different. I was no longer the same woman who had gone under. When the nurse walked in, she stopped. Not because I had woken up, but because of the way I looked at her. There was no fear, no weariness, no emptiness. Maybe it was the gaze of someone who had returned from a place human hands cannot reach, someone who had yet to find words for what they'd seen. I said just one thing to her. I have seen. I have known. And I will live. In the days that followed, I existed somewhere between two realms. I felt my body, but I also felt something more, something higher, something gentle and ever-present behind every smallest movement. Every breath, every glance out the window, every ache from the healing wound carried the same quiet message. You are still here, and there is more for you to do. The first thing I learned, forgiveness doesn't begin with forgiving others. It begins with forgiving yourself. Forgiving myself for not knowing, for not being able to change what had already unraveled, for praying to die while still alive. I no longer punish myself for my husband's death, because now I understand each soul walks its journey. No one can live it for them, and no one can keep them here once their spirit has chosen to go. The second thing, do not delay love. I began to write again, not books this time, but letters, to the people who had passed through my life, those I had hurt, misunderstood, or drifted from. Not to apologize, but to say thank you for being there, even if just for a moment. I walk every day now, beneath the same familiar trees. But this time, I see each leaf as if it were the very first. I breathe in the scent of wet grass and whisper, thank you, that I still have a nose to smell. I press my hand against the window pane and feel deep gratitude that my fingers are still warm. Every small thing has become sacred, because I know I could so easily not be here. The third, and perhaps greatest, lesson Meaning doesn't come from what we have, but from how we show up. You can live your whole life without ever truly being present in it. I used to. I wrote books out of duty. I loved out of habit. I forgave out of politeness. Not anymore. Now I live slower but deeper. I've learned to say no. Learned to pause even in the middle of busyness and ask myself, does this bring me closer to love or further from it? I began to share my story. At first, only with a few close friends. They looked at me with hesitation, afraid I was unraveling from trauma. But then they listened. And they cried. And they said, I've never heard anything that made me feel so light inside. Little by little, I began writing again. But this time not about architecture. This time about the soul. About the journey back from death. About the light. The voice. The love that never demanded, never judged. And about how someone can rise again from the ashes of their despair. I don't tell this story to be special. I tell it because I know there are others out there hurting like I once did. People are quietly begging to die. People who think this world has run out of miracles. And if I can do just one thing with whatever time I have left, it's to remind them, miracles don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they come in a glance, a breath, a wound that has finally healed. I died. And then I came back. Not to simply continue living, but to live truthfully. And living truthfully isn't easy. Because not everyone is ready to believe in what they've never seen. And when I began to share my near-death experience publicly, I started to face skeptical eyes, mocking words, and quiet souls who whispered, I saw the light too. I don't tell this story to be believed. I tell it because I can't stay silent anymore. After coming back, after seeing, after knowing, after meeting, I understood. I wasn't sent back just to finish out my days. I was sent back to carry a message. A truth that goes beyond religion, beyond dogma, beyond every rule we try to place around the sacred. Death is not the end. And love never disappears. I began sharing my near-death experience. At first, it was just hesitant journal entries. Then small posts online. Eventually, I stood in front of a camera. No script. No direction. Just a woman who had lost everything and was given something far greater than life itself. I died. And I met God. He didn't ask about my religion. He didn't judge me. He just loved me. And the strange, beautiful thing? I saw my husband again. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He just wanted me to keep living, but to live truly. Some believed me. Some didn't. Some called me a liar. Some told me I needed psychiatric help. But then there were others. Quiet souls who messaged me at 2 a.m., whispering through a screen. I saw that light too, but I never dared to tell anyone. I stood between life and death once, and I felt everything you described. Thank you. Because of you, I'm no longer afraid to die. And that's when I knew. I didn't return to be quiet. I returned to witness. Not to prove anything, but to affirm it. Like someone who has crossed a desert and comes back to tell the next traveler. There's water ahead. I've tasted it. And it tastes like love. The life I've discovered isn't about enduring days. It's about filling each moment with meaning, connection, presence, and gratitude. I no longer fear death, but I no longer beg for it either. I live each day with a clarity I never had before. Every sunset, every first rain, every hug from an old friend, they're miracles now. And I've learned to forgive. Not just people, but life itself. Even when it was cruel. Even when it was cold. Even when it took the thing I loved most. Because without his death, I would not have awakened. Without that illness, I would not have rerouted my journey. Without that fall, I never would have known I was already rising. Now every time I share my story, I always begin with one thing. You don't have to believe me. But if you're hurting, if you're in despair, if you're thinking of giving up, then hear me as someone who stood on the other side and came back just to tell you, you're not done yet. Your journey isn't over. And what's ahead may be more beautiful than you can imagine. I live, and I tell, not to shock, not to be known, but to fulfill the mission the light entrusted to me, to bring unconditional love back to this world. Even just a drop can be enough to save a soul that's gone dry. I still remember the first time I stepped outside after the surgery, after the near death, after returning from that realm of light. It was drizzling. A soft, first rain of the season, thin as mist, cool like a quiet sadness meant to wake you up just enough. I stood at the edge of my porch, hand outstretched, catching the drops. And in that moment I cried, not because of the rain, but because for the first time in my life, I saw how beautiful rain could be. No one tells you how hard it is to live after you've died. Because you can't go back to the way things were. You have to live like someone who has seen the truth in a world still fast asleep. I don't fear death anymore, but I fear meaninglessness. I fear waking up and not knowing why I'm still here. I fear the hollow small talk, the soulless conversations, the gatherings that only serve to fill a calendar. So I started to sift through my life. I cleaned up. Not my house, but my relationships. I stopped holding on to people who left me feeling empty after every meeting. I learned how to say no to things that drained me. I let go of the need to please everyone because I finally understood. This life is far too sacred to live through someone else's eyes. I began meditating, not to become someone else, but to meet myself again every morning. I started journaling, not to impress anyone, but to remember that I had once died, and had once been loved unconditionally, in a place where no one even remembers your name. I rediscovered the quiet joys of simply being alive, making a cup of tea and sitting still long enough to feel it cool. Rereading old letters from my husband that I once didn't dare to open. Holding a child tightly, without thinking, I had to teach them anything. I call that deep living. And I've learned that anyone can live that way if they're willing to touch the truth. I began speaking with people in deep despair. They found me after watching a video, reading something I'd written, or hearing an interview I had been invited to join. They didn't come to me looking for science. They didn't ask for proof. They came for one thing: hope. I remember a woman who broke down in tears when I held her hand. She had lost her only son in an accident. She said, "I don't know how to keep living." I didn't say, "You have to be strong." I didn't say, "Time heals all wounds." I said just one thing, the same thing I once heard from the other side of the light: "You're not done yet." She gripped my hand and wept like a child. She didn't need advice. She just needed someone who understood how big that pain was. And that's when I realized most of us don't need someone to fix us. We just need someone to stay, to sit with us, to not leave. I began writing books again. The first one told the story of my near-death experience. I called it The Light Without a Face, because what I met had no shape, no religion, no language, and yet it loved me more deeply than any human on earth ever had. The book spread faster than I expected. Not because I was famous, but because people are starving for the truth that after the pain, after the loss, after death itself, there is still something. At my first book signing, I met hundreds of people who had been holding their own silent stories for years. A widower who lost his wife 20 years ago held my hand, trembling, and said, "I once saw her in a dream. She was sitting in a light, just like the one you described." A young man, a suicide survivor, came up to me quietly and said, "When I tried to end my life, I felt myself float upward, and I heard a voice say, 'If you stay, your mother will never recover.'" I chose to come back. I don't call them patients. I call them the awakened. And I've come to understand this. I didn't return just to live a life for myself. I returned to walk beside them, those who are still living in this world, but have already glimpsed what lies beyond the veil. I am a wife who once lost her husband in grief, a woman who once begged to die, a patient who once bled out on a bathroom floor, a soul who once stepped into the light, and now I am a witness, not to anything grand or mystical, but to something profoundly simple. Love is stronger than death. And you, even in your confusion, even in your silence, are deeply loved. Even if you don't know it, even if you're not ready to believe it. If you're still watching this, I know you've been hurt. You've asked yourself, is this the end? You've secretly wished for a hand, any hand, to reach for you in the dark. So let this story be that hand. I don't know what you believe. I'm not asking you to believe in me. But I hope through everything I've seen, everything I've endured, everything I've returned from, you'll find the courage to live, truly live. To dare to love deeply. To dare to forgive. To dare to be silent when there's nothing left to prove. To dare to believe that you're here for a reason. And if one day you collapse under the weight of it all, remember this: it's not because you're weak. It's because your soul is longing to be seen. If you're still listening, if something deep inside your heart is stirring, if you've ever experienced a moment you couldn't explain, a dream, a light, a feeling that someone you loved is still near, or if you've ever stood at the edge between life and death, fallen into darkness, only to be lifted by something miraculous. Or maybe you've simply known pain, felt loss, woke up one morning and quietly wondered, why am I still here? I invite you to share. Leave your story in the comments. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to make sense. It just has to be true. Because maybe your story will be the light someone else is searching for. Because maybe you're not the only one who's seen the light. And maybe, just maybe, by telling it, you'll finally realize you were never alone.